We're kicking it off with Morag Barrett, a highly accomplished keynote speaker, leadership development expert, and best-selling author of Cultivate, the Power of Winning Relationships and the Future-Proof Workplace. Morag is the founder and CEO of SkyTeam, a boutique leadership development group that has supported more than 10,000 leaders from 20 countries around the world and on 6 different continents. Morag draws from a deep and unique operational skill set, including global leadership and executive development. She earned a Master of Human Resource Management and received the Senior Professional in Human Resources designation as well. She is also a recognized business coach for Corporate Coach University and is a chartered fellow of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development in the UK. I'm glad I mentioned UK because when you hear her speak, you will not know she's from the United Kingdom. Anyway, Morag was recently selected for more than 16,000 candidates as a top 100 coach by Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, recognized as the world's most influential leadership thinker and executive coach. Needless to say, we are kicking it off with a strong leadoff hitter, ladies and gentlemen, a dear friend, a lovely lady, a great mother, Morag Barrett. Come on up.
Come on up. I'm running. Nice to see you again. All right, my affirmation for today is I am a swan. And you may use this because you are all swans in the pond in which you operate. But you know those days when all you know is your feet are doing this and everybody else is gliding effortlessly. In that moment, I want you to just look under the table, not literally, but to remember that everybody, we're all paddling as fast as you feel you are. So we are all swans today, and welcome to this exciting event. Thelma and Louise, Woody and Buzz Lightyear, Ben and Jerry, Morag and Eric Spencer. These are all dynamic duos. Some you will have heard of, and maybe the Morag and Eric Spencer is a new one to you, but watch this space. And what stands out for these sometimes fictional, but also real dynamic duos is that together they were able to achieve more than they were individually. One of my favorite dynamic duos or superheroes is Batman. But I don't know if you're aware, Batman, when he first appeared in the comic books back in the late 30s, that's the 1930s, he was actually more of a Lone Ranger, as I mix my metaphors and my heroes. He was a brooding, solitary character who, spoiler alert, was Wayne by day and superhero by night, clearing Gotham City of all of the evil that might be manifested. But within a year of him hitting the comic books, Robin, the boy wonder, appeared, not just as his sidekick, but as his friend and his ally. Batman's character went from being solitary, dark, and brooding to having a little bit more humor. Holy smokes, Batman. You remember the cartoon, you know how that went. But the inventors and the writers weren't done then. 3 years later, Alfred appeared, back in the Batcave with steaming hot chocolate, Batmobiles, and everything that you could desire in order to continue that fight against crime. And here's the importance of best friends at work, is we may not be standing in dark alleys about to fight the Joker or worrying about what the Riddler is up to. But sometimes in human resources and in our work as leaders, it can feel as intimidating. And you think about the impact that the pandemic had. Everything, the spotlight immediately turned to you as the people professionals in terms of what are we going to do? The sands were changing literally minute by minute, day by day. You know this, you've lived it. And the question isn't just who is your ally on the good days. The question that you need is who is your ally? Who has your back, both in that alley and back in the office, back in the bat cave on those tough days? Who can you rely on when there is uncertainty, emotions are raised, and the stakes are high? And that's what I want to talk to you about today. In my first book, Cultivate, I introduced the concept of the relationship ecosystem and the 4 relationship dynamics that we experience throughout our careers. The adversaries, the continually toxic, tough, butting heads relationships. The rivals, where when it suits their agenda, they're all for you, but when it doesn't, they're against you, and there's a little bit more elbow jockeying and bruising that goes alongside it. Our supporters, fair weather friends who are there and fun to hang out with, but when the going gets tough, it's crickets. They're not going to take personal risk and put their head over the parapet to help you out. And then there are our allies, our go-to people that not just in moments of stress we can turn to and know that they will have our back, but also those people that we go to when we want to celebrate success and the progress that we've made. So I've been asked by leaders, okay, I understand the relationship ecosystem, the dynamics, but how do I show up as an ally? How do I create these dynamic duo relationships that ensure that we are invincible and better together? And that's the research that I want to share with you today. The research that's going to inform our next book, Better Work Together, that'll be out next year. And that's the only plug you're going to get for that one. But before I share our research, mine, Eric Spencer and Ruby Vesely, the 3 of us at SkyTeam, I'm going to start with you. And I want you to think back through your career, either about the best job ever and or the best colleague ever that you've worked with, the person that you would jump at the chance to work with again, or the job that just accelerated your confidence, your career, your positive affirmations. And what I'd like you to do, for those of you in the room, if you feel appropriate, feel free to get up and mingle at an elbows bump or a 6-foot distance. For those of you who are listening to us and streaming with us, we'll be putting you into breakout rooms as well. And I would love to hear back what made the best job so memorable, or what made your colleagues come to mind as you think about your best boss, best colleague. Let's take about 10 minutes to do that so that everybody online has an opportunity to contribute. Off you go. All right, start wrapping up your conversations. It's interesting to me how little of our BC life we've actually forgotten. BC before children, I have 3 of them, all 6 foot tall, don't remember life before children, or BC before COVID. You like that one? Or AD after distancing. And what do I mean? Well, as a professional speaker, here's what happens when you walk up to a table. They're all chatty, 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 and then, shh, quick, she's coming. And then somebody in this room who is adorable, but who started telling me some of the insights from the table went, oh. And I went, what? She goes, well, it means you're about to pick on me. And I'm going, well, yep, that's how this works. So thank you for all of you, for the energized conversations and the relationships that you're starting to nurture around this table. Because whether you are colleagues today, acquaintances today, first time our eyes met, because this is where I was sitting earlier this morning. If this is the first time that your eyes have met, who knows, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, we could be colleagues on the same project. And yes, we'll go through the, oh, haven't we met somewhere before? That sort of awkward dance. but we're starting from somewhere and something in common, which accelerates our learning and our journey to becoming our own dynamic duo. This matters. But my opening question for those who are streaming, and we'll come to you in a moment, and those in the room, was all about making connections and understanding from your career to date those best bosses and colleagues and or best jobs ever, and what made them special. So I'm going to start here. So introduce yourself so that the larger room can hear. And then what were a couple of the characteristics that came out from your conversation?
My name's Alexis, and one of the really good characteristics of like a good boss would be somebody that is flexible.
Say more about what you mean by flexible, because I laughed and said it sounds like a yoga class, and that was not what you meant.
No, but somebody that can put themselves, be a little bit more empathetic and put themselves in your shoes when something comes up.
Okay, empathy. I heard that at one of the other tables. It's an important characteristic. Okay, and then you added it with?
So my name is Venencia, and one of the things that Alexis and I talked about was how the bosses that we remembered were ones who gave us honest feedback. There was no sugarcoating for us to grow and move forward and develop personally.
Okay, thank you. All right, for those of you who are streaming in, please do share in the chat and we will make sure to call you out. But I'm coming over here, Crystal, my friend Crystal. All right, so tell me about best job ever, best boss ever.
So she's forcing me to say that my affirmation.
Remember, you are a swan. Oh, she. No, teamwork. Okay.
So my affirmation today was my light will shine bright today.
Her light will shine bright today. Yes, it will. Come on then, Crystal, take your moment.
Perfect. So my best boss, I was describing to Christine and Beth, his name was Carlos Morgan, and he made it his mission to mentor me. And so he made it his mission to say, I will make sure that before I leave here, I'll put you in a managerial position or set you up to be in a managerial position or leader. And so he literally mentored me, involved me in meetings, involved me in decisions, respected me. So there was a mutual respect. Really, truly sought out my counsel and my advice. And that led to when he led, he turned down an offer and it was extended to me and they accepted me. So it was the mentorship for me. And then that extended at this table to a program. And we just kind of talked about just mentoring and how difficult it is and how it should be one of the things that we use to retain employees currently. So I talked about how Beth and I currently work for an organization called BSI, British Standards Institution. And we've recently implemented what's called Reciprocal Diverse Mentoring Program. And so within that program, we have our C-suite execs who reside in London. They're partnered with colleagues. I'm one of the colleagues. The colleagues are minorities. So whether they're Black, brown, women, veterans, a part of the LGBTQ plus community, we essentially were partnered. We went through training. So a few days training with an outside organization. We were taught that we're at the same level and we're going to share human experiences with each other. And we were paired again with colleagues, with executives. And so once a month, we're just sharing life and doing life with each other.
Oh my goodness, thank you for sharing. Did you hear that? The phrase human experiences. Thank you. Yes, round of applause. And the reason I pause is my first career was in banking and I started in the year, but it was in the 90s. So it was a couple of years ago. And I can guarantee you the concept of human experiences wasn't on the table. It wasn't even on the radar. I remember being told it's not personal, it's just business. You know, the toughen up cupcake, get on with it approach to management. And it is such BS. It's why I wrote the first book. It's why it is even more important now when we've spent 2 years either at arm's length or working from home. The sense of disconnection is endemic in everything, in our families, in our social circles, and especially in our work circles. And the power of mentoring is a key retention strategy. And as we think about the Great Resignation, I'll be talking about that later on, it's the great recalibration. And if you can tap into formal and informal networks so that I can have that sense of belonging and connection with my colleagues, I guarantee that you and your teams will start to benefit. So what are we seeing online? Gillian, what do we have?
We have some great stories. One is best boss made me feel like a member of her team. She listened to me, mentored me, empowered me, rather than someone that she supervises. We work together rather than me working for her. And then one more, we have Melissa, Natasha, and I talked about how important it is to be in a work environment where you have a friend, there is limited micromanaging, and team members are inspired to work and collaborate together. So much so that one of us shared that we'd think twice about leaving our current organization because of our work besties.
Our work besties, BFFs. It just gives me goosebumps as I think about it, especially where you say it made us think twice about moving on. Our workplace friendships, when we think about it, we spend 2/3 of our lives online now or in the office. We'd better hope we have at least one good friend in the office. And if you think about all of the characteristics of your own best jobs, it allowed you to learn new things, to grow, to challenge you. The person who invested in you and worked with you, it didn't feel like you were being done to you, it was a partnership. It reminds me of this amazing quote from Dr. Maya Angelou. And it's that she's learned that people will forget what you said, they will forget what you did, but people will always remember how you made them feel. And this is at the heart of being an ally, of being a BFF, is how do others feel in your presence? And we need to look up from our phones, we need to look up from the Zoom camera and the endless to-do list to pause and reflect on that. We then need to choose to show up and be intentional about how we're appearing in our meetings with our colleagues, curious about where they are and meeting them where they're at. And then we need to step up. And as Tony said in the introduction, it's, did we do our best? Are we doing our best in this moment? And how are we tweaking and changing our game in each interaction to continue to be better versions of ourselves and helping our colleagues to tap into the better version of themselves? Because we know when it doesn't work, when we're feeling blue, when there is that disconnection that's endemic in the organizations, then 3 out of 5 Americans at the moment report a sense of loneliness. I've been there. I remember sitting in a coffee shop in Manhattan with literally thousands of people walking past, hubbub, the noise of the city, and yet feeling like I was alone. Have you had that experience? There was an epidemic of loneliness before the pandemic, and the mental health issues, the stress, the anxiety that have only increased in the last 18 months. And when we feel lonely, when we feel isolated from our colleagues, the research shows that we are up to 5 times more likely to be absent from work. And I describe absent from work as not just not showing up for the day, it's logging into that endless Zoom meeting and just not being present. You can see me on the camera, but maybe I'm multitasking. Maybe I'm gazing out of the window, thinking about other things, but I am not fully present in the discussion and the decision at hand. And a feeling of loneliness, the anxiety and stress, research has shown is the equivalent, this is shocking to me, the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. In terms of our health, in terms of our stress, in terms of our blood pressure, in terms of so many other factors. Feeling blue isn't just a trite phrase. Feeling blue is a reality. But when we're feeling the feels, when we do have strong relationships at work, when we do have that sense of connection, the picture couldn't be further different. 46% of people reporting to a LinkedIn survey recently reported an increase in their overall happiness, not just job satisfaction, but life satisfaction when they felt like they had strong connections at work. 91% of millennials report and recognize that the importance of a professional network to their career success. And think about the opportunities that have been presented to you. It is the minority that tend to be the result of the cold call or the resume that we've just sent off and hoped that it will make it through the keyword search. Invariably, there is somebody else in the process that has opened the door a crack, who knows somebody in that organization, who's coached and mentored us as we prepare for the interviews. And then the kicker of them all, the Gallup research from the last 20 years, is that when we answer yes, especially to question 10, do you have a best friend at work? Then we are 63% more engaged. And who wouldn't want a part of that? Do you have a best friend at work? As you heard in the introduction, I work as an executive coach, and recently I've been adopting this question to open each of my coaching conversations. What's your number? I was coaching a senior leader at a tech company, and I asked her what her number was. The organization is a little chaotic, which is British for a bit of a mess, which is even more British for whatever your worst nightmare is, double it, add 9, and you're probably getting close. And so on my very scientific scale of what's your number, 1 is I'm ready to walk out the door, it sucks. And 10 is everything is fabulous. And her answer 2 weeks ago was 3 out of 10. Think about that for a moment. 3 out of 10. What's your number today? You don't have to tell me, but I want you to think about it, because within your control and within that coaching conversation, what we explored was, what will it take to +1, to get her from a 3 to a 4 versus heading closer to walking out the door and that organization losing talent. McKinsey recently shared that 40% of employees at this moment in time are considering leaving their organization. And of those, 60% would consider leaving without another job. Those are the ones that are heading from a 3 to a 2. What is the number for your organization? Because when we see the headlines around the Great Resignation, it's the difference between I quit or a sense of belonging and I fit. And I know which side of the equation I want to be, and what we need to be as an organization, as HR professionals. So back to you. Think about the last month. Here we are. Where are we? Oh, it's nearly the end of October. Trick or treating week, candy. All right, so in a work setting, think about the last month, the last 3 weeks or so. How many of you have been surprised, maybe by positive feedback from somebody? Maybe you thought you did an okay job, and somebody just come and said, oh my God, you were amazing, thank you. Anybody had the positive surprise feedback? Oh, a couple of hands went up at the back, thank you. How many of you have been hesitant, stopped yourself speaking up in a meeting for fear of how others might react to your message? Others, yeah, a few more hands go up. What about guarded? How many of you feel like you can't be the real you at work or have to put on a professional mask? Again, a few hands. Thank you for those of you who've got the courage and vulnerability to put that up there. Well, in our research, 67% of leaders report that their success has been undermined by the words or actions of a colleague that's caused them to be surprised, caused them to be hesitant, caused them to be guarded. But here's what I do know, is that your colleagues rarely get up in the morning with the intent of sabotaging the success of others. I recognize there's those few outliers, However, for the vast majority of us, our goal when we get up in the morning, whether it's Monday, Tuesday, or tomorrow, is to leave a positive impression. But what we find is we often judge ourselves by our intent and what we know we're capable of, but we judge others by their impact and what they do. Let me give you an example. It's the stories that we write and the stories that we write in a nanosecond that can get us misperceived as misperceived as adversaries versus perceived as the allies that we want. So socially, I have a good friend. I haven't seen her for a couple of months, social distancing and all that, and she happens to live out of state. And I sent her a text message just to check in and see how she was doing. And I didn't hear anything back. And I didn't think anything of it, but she's normally really quick to respond. So I sent a follow-up message the following week, and still crickets. At that point, my mind went into overdrive. This is my best friend from high school, so you've got to understand there's a little bit of dramatic license here, but I honestly thought, doesn't she like me anymore? My inner 13-year-old was coming out. What's happened? What have I done that's upset her and caused her to not respond? How many of you have written stories like that when somebody doesn't reply to your emails? Thank you. Well, it turns out she'd just not seen it. She'd been dealing with other things. She lives back in the UK. She was dealing with other things with her family. And when we reconnected, it was like we were back in high school and catching up and so on. Those stories, that awfulizing, the trash talk that so quickly entered my mind was irrelevant. But it happens all the time at work too. Let's, for sake of imagine that you have a colleague who continually interrupts you. Just shout out for me and into the chat if you're streaming in. If you have a colleague who continually interrupts you, what are the stories that you write about that colleague in that moment? And Gillian, please just read them out as they start to come through. But for those of you in the room, let's just take a couple whilst we wait for people to type in. What do you think about a colleague who continually interrupts you? Yes. They don't trust you. Yes. Oh, they think they know everything. Smarty pants, yes. They're the worst. Okay, let's just dig in there. All right, yeah. Oh, yeah, they won't think you realize how smart they are unless they speak up. It's all them, them, them. What else? What are you getting from the interwebs, Gillian, if anything?
So far we have, they don't respect my opinions.
Yeah. Okay, we've got front row here. Lack of, say more about the lack of confidence. Is it their lack of confidence or your lack of confidence? Oh, so they don't have confidence. They're just chatting just to make noise. All right. Yes, here. 2. They're not listening. Oh, what they think that what they have to say is more important than what you have to say. Okay. Any more, Gillian?
Yeah, they're very similar. They think they are better than everyone, and they have no interest in hearing me.
They think they're better than anyone and have no interest in hearing me. Huh. My name is Morag Barrett, and I am a habitual interrupter. Now, I do this exercise for 2 reasons. One is to remind me that interrupting is not appreciated. Okay, so let's just debrief this for a moment. So what do you notice about the stories that we write in that first instance about our colleague who interrupts? The stories that in theory you've just written about me if I've interrupted you. What do you notice? Yes, here in the middle. It's all negative. Now, we are hardwired to assume the worst, and it's great because when we lived in caves, it kept us alive. Rustle in the grass, saber-toothed tiger, run away. But as scary as I can be, it's not life or death, but our amygdala, our limbic system doesn't know the difference. So negative, we assume the worst. Which of the stories that you wrote about the habitual interrupter is actually true? You don't know, do you? But if you think about it, if we listen to those stories without considering alternatives, it can cause us to react with behavior that can just exacerbate the situation and cause a downward spiral. Because if I'm going to interrupt you, maybe your story is, well, I'll show her that I've got something to share. I'm going to interrupt her. And it's just like, and we end up in this downward spiral. So let's look at the bright side. As I've admitted, I am an habitual interrupter. Why do you think I interrupt? What are the positive stories as to why I interrupt? Yes. I like to understand the content. Thank you. And then I'll come over here. Yes. I'm excited. Does it show? It kind of does. It gets a little out of control sometimes. Yes. What were you going to? Excited. Thank you. Well, I like that. Yes, at the back there. Oh, yes. So there is that, because it is a little bit of like a pigeon in here. It's, oh, and it's gone. Got to write it down. Yes. I definitely have to talk to think. So I am a verbal processor. Gillian, what are you seeing at the back? Is there
We
sympathy?
also had excited, interruption, and Sharon. And then feeling of collaboration.
A feeling of collaboration. And we'll take one more. Is there anybody else in the room who's got another good news story? Oh, I've just got somebody else pointed at. Yes. You're engaged? I'm engaged. Yes. So in fact, unlike the negative story that said, hey, you're not listening, I'm so engaged in the conversation, what actually is going on is, oh my goodness, you just said something amazing. Let's go deep. I want to understand more. And we'll come back to what you said, we're going to say later on. But here's the challenge, and that's why the previous slide of we judge others by their impact, we judge ourselves by our intent. Just because I know I'm excited and you said something fabulous and I want to go deep does not excuse interrupting. And the power of this exercise is it helps to remind me that the gap between my intent and the impact I have, I own making sure that that is as close as possible to avoid misunderstanding. But as you see, we write those stories in a nanosecond. Those stories tend to be negative, and invariably that results in damaged relationships versus strengthened relationships. So I'm again, and I'm just going to give you 5 minutes in your breakout rooms, at your tables, to think about you. Are you a habitual interrupter like I am? Where are you most often misperceived or misunderstood, i.e. what's the gap between your intent and your impact? And what impact has that had on your leadership reputation? Because when we come back, I'm going to reveal to you the 5 practices of an ally mindset, the 5 practices that will help you to close that gap and answer the question, not do you have a best friend at work? But in fact, the more important question is, are you a best friend at work? So 5 minutes, where are you most often misperceived or misunderstood, and what impact does that have on your leadership reputation? And then we'll move into the ally mindset. All right, I know I'm moving fast. So the question on the table was, how are you most often misunderstood, and how is that impact your leadership reputation? Oh, some interesting noise there. All right, so Mark kindly volunteered, or maybe there was a hint of voluntold, but you had a great story about being misunderstood and misinterpreted.
Sure. So sometimes I'm misunderstood as an interrupter, self-acknowledged, maybe recovering interrupter. But about 20, 25 years ago, I took a personality test, and the person that was reading back the feedback actually said to me while she was reading, she goes, "You interrupt people a lot, don't you?" And that came out in my actual personality test. And what she harkened it back to is just that I think so fast, and maybe it's because I'm a born and raised New Yorker, but think fast, talk fast, want to get to the next thing. And I've had to come up with ways to take that back, breathe, write down the things I want to talk about and deal with that. So I've tried to manage that and be aware of it.
So what are some of the tips that you have? What are some of the tips that help you to slow down and allow me to keep up?
Well, I tried not to interrupt you as you were saying that. But one of the things is I always write things down. Like when I have all these other ideas or concepts that I want to bring up in the conversation, I write them down and wait for the time in the conversation to bring them up. The other thing is just taking a breath in a conversation. When I feel like I'm going to jump in, just take a breath, let them say what they're going to say, and then wait for my turn.
And this is a common symptom. Which was the tool? Was it DISC? Was it Myers-Briggs? Do you remember?
It was not Myers-Briggs. I don't remember what it was.
There are many. And what I love about those tools is A, the self-awareness, but it gives a common language and framework for what we know when it doesn't work, because we leave the meeting with Mark BMWing, bitching, moaning and whining about maybe how Morag kept interrupting and Mark wasn't listening. And furthest from the truth, we were just 3 moves down the chessboard as to what do we do next and moving on. So often with our Ds, our fast extroverted thinkers, when they say, well, what ideas do you have? It gets misinterpreted that actually they've already made their mind up. But that isn't always the case. And it's back to the negative stories can undermine and impact our behavior and can be furthest from the truth in terms of our true intent. So I'm coming back over here because I heard a counterpoint to the interrupting and how often we might be misinterpreted. So may I pick on you? Yes. You have no voice. So how are you most often misinterpreted?
I'm most often misinterpreted as if I'm not engaged or I'm not listening or paying attention because I'm not the interrupter, but I'm actually taking mental notes and observing, and I'll connect points later on once the conversation is finished.
Remind me, what's your name?
My name is Bria.
Bria. So Bria is the deep thinker. And as we know, that can get misinterpreted, especially in Western society, if you're not being the extroverted Duracell bunny, that you're just not engaged. But in fact, what you're doing is you're connecting the dots and listening deeply to what's being shared in the room. Gillian, what do we have online?
We have being virtual. I learned to mute myself.
Oh, a deliberate muting. I like that. Okay, yes. So it doesn't just happen at an individual level. We can all think about times where somebody has come and given us feedback and you think, well, that's not me. That's not what I was trying to do. But it also impacts teams. And as we know, the reputation of HR. So say a little bit more about that conversation.
Yes, so we discussed how in general, I didn't feel that I'm really misperceived or misunderstood at work very much, but that our industry is, and that we're I'm with a company who did not have HR pretty much before I started a year and a half ago. And so it's the engaging about, even though I can run pretty lean, how do we scale HR? Convincing them what is necessary. And it's just the misperceptions of our industry and what it takes to get our work done. They to some degree actually thought I alone was going to take care of everything. So the industry itself.
But there you go. We've all been there. HR misperceived as hugs and lollipops, the only place you go when it's really blowing up in your face. But becoming a strategic partner is the positive side. We have so much to value, but sometimes we need to help rewrite the stories of past experience with personnel or whatever may have gone before. And that brings me to the ally mindset, because whether it's me and my best friend in England, whether it's me as an interrupter, whether it's us as an HR profession, it's time to change the stories that no longer serve us. But as I said earlier, the only way we know what stories are being told is when we look up and pay attention, when we show up differently and step up differently to our relationships. And so in the work with the leaders, we've interviewed or surveyed more than 500 leaders. We've had probably the same, if not close to 1,000 leaders go through the Cultivating Winning Relationship workshop. And when we looked at the data, we identified 5 practices. I'm going to switch to the other mic, by the way. Otherwise, it makes me feel like I've got to sing. So here we go. I'm going to sing because that would be terrible. All right, so 5 practices that make for an ally mindset. So whereas the relationship ecosystem is all about you and our relationship, the ally mindset is all about me and how I show up in the world and how I show up in service of my purpose or how I show up in service of you. And at the foundation, the easiest for me, certainly of the 5 practices, is what we describe as abundance and generosity. It goes back to the conversation earlier around mentoring. Because when we have a foundation of abundance and generosity, giving of our own experience, sharing of information, especially warnings of impending disaster, coaching and mentoring others to help them to be the best that they can, is second nature. This is about the rising tide raises all boats, that sharing my flame, as another metaphor here, lights your candle, it just makes the room brighter. So abundance and generosity is the foundation. And certainly in a business setting, I'm often asked, who are SkyTeam's competitors? And that question literally bamboozles me. I can feel like the cogs slipping in my head because it really does not make sense. It's not how I am wired. And I'll give you an example. Literally 2 weeks ago, Charlene called me. Charlene is an acquaintance. I know of her. I had never spoken to her before. And the original question was around, how do I price a workshop? Charlene does not do workshops. She's an individual coach. And as I asked more questions, and I was channeling my thoughtful listening, I was not interrupting too much. As I asked clarifying questions, as we spoke on Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, the session she was leading was going to be the following Wednesday for a somewhat dysfunctional and broken team. So the conversation pivoted. And we actually talked about her plans for her part of the agenda and how she was going to lead the team through various conversations. And as we talked about it, she recognized that in fact, what she had intended with a dysfunctional team was likely to backfire. So we modified it. And here is the text message that I got from her on Wednesday. Huge thank you. Not only did you help me to design the session, you gave me the gift of confidence. It went beautifully. At the end, the person, the CEO this is, who had hired me, gave me a hug, and another leader hired me on the spot. That just gives me goosebumps. And that's my personal example of abundance and generosity. If I'd done a limited thinking mindset of, well, she's a competitor, I can't help her to win, I would have just stayed surface level. Abundance and generosity is grounded in our values, but it's elevated in our personal and professional relationships. When we are willing to give, we all get better. But it's not just arbitrary confetti. The second part of the ally mindset is then about connection and compassion. We have to have some sort of connection for you to want to pick up the confetti or even pay attention to what I might want to say. Some of that is from our technical knowledge and our experience, the CV that goes before us, but it's also built in the individual conversations, the coffees, the breakfasts, in the interactions that we have every single day. And you think about your best bosses, best colleagues, I heard empathy, that would reside here. It's getting to know you beyond the job title that you might have and getting to know the human being behind the job title. It's not just focusing on what you do for the team or the company, it's actually putting those aside and spending time asking, how are you doing? Curious as to whether you're a 3 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10. And no matter where you are on the scale, like Crystal shared, It's the coaching and mentoring to still help you to be a +1. Because when we have connection and compassion, then we can get to the hardest one of all for me, courage and vulnerability. Because without courage and vulnerability, you don't get to intimacy. Intimacy in an HR appropriate way, of course, but you don't get to a relationship that will not only skip through the daisies and be great on the good days, but you also don't get the strength of relationships that will weather the storm. And so for me, courage, when it comes to business decisions, easy peasy lemon squeezy. Starting Sky Team and saying to my husband, we'll give it a year, 16 years ago. That was easy. But courage when it comes to interpersonal and tough feedback, oh my goodness, I can teach a great course on it, but taking my own medicine, I will lie awake at 1 o'clock playing out the various scripts until eventually I just have to improv, start the conversation and go with the flow. And vulnerability invariably has been my Achilles heel. If you've read Cultivate, you'll recall the story of me coaching the CFO in London, and we would walk the block in London and end up at the pub, because that's how we did our best coaching. But after about 6 months, I remember him saying to me that I knew so much about him, his life, the fact that his home life was stressful as well as the work life. But he said to me, Morag, I know nothing about you. And some of it's the Britishness, some of it is growing up in banking, but a lot of it was just me. How can I be a great executive coach? How can I be a leadership thinker if my own situation is not swan-like on the surface? And so I have been learning to be more vulnerable, to share not just the successes, but also share those 1 o'clock in the mornings, moments of self-doubt, to share the bad habits that I'm successful in spite of, and the skills that I am aspiring to learn that will make my team and I better together. So abundance and generosity is about looking out into the arena. How can I help you? How can I help this team? How can I help the organization? Connection and compassion is the human element and the human experience, getting beyond the transaction to how we work together and what drives you beyond just the task at hand. And courage and vulnerability gets us away from, I'm in charge, I know the answer, I've got it, don't worry, follow me, to, you know what, first time I've ever done it too, let's work it out together. Being able to ask for help and take that help when it is offered. Because when you have courage and vulnerability, when we're willing to admit we don't know, when we remain curious to others' point of view, and I learn to listen and enjoy the silence and the pause, then we get to candor and debate. And candor without debate is the pull the pin candor grenade. And we've all worked with colleagues who get a little bored in meetings and will say something contentious just to see if they can get a rise out of somebody. Or that they sit back and are not willing to listen to different points of view. So these are why they're couplets. Candor and debate means that we can have the tough conversations. We can raise the elephant in the room, the gorilla in the corner, but then we are part of the conversation around how are we going to move forward, either around or in spite of that potential risk. And then the capstone of them all is action and accountability. Because if we don't have action and accountability, it is nothing but hot air. And we've all worked with leaders. I'm working with a leadership team who made a fairly big strategic decision nearly a year ago and have still not communicated it to the organization because they're waiting for the perfect time. Or the team that seems to be stuck in Groundhog Day about how they need to operate, but aren't individually or collectively following through on the action and accountability around those new behaviors and how they're going to show up. So when you join these together, if you think about it, even just with feedback, abundance and generosity is about seeking feedback, and it's about offering feedback. Connection and compassion is the empathy and the heart-led servant leadership. People who are willing to give us the feedback that we need to hear, and empathetically in a way that we can actually hear it, not just that candor grenade. Courage and vulnerability allows us to show up as our authentic self. Remember my earlier question about being guarded and do we have to wear that professional mask? Well, when we have an ally mindset and a team of allies, we don't need to pretend. We can be true to ourselves while still serving the needs of the business. And when we get to candor and debate, it means we have the tough conversations that results in a stronger relationship when I leave the room. Not the BMWing that I described earlier, where I'm bitching, moaning, and whining about what you've said, or I'm telling my team, oh yeah, they decided it's stupid, but we have to do it. No, we dissent here, but we're one voice to the rest of the organization. Yes, I hear your concerns. We debated that too, but we're still moving forward in this way. And here's why and what I need you to do in order to make this a success. And then we get to action and accountability that allows us to move forward and affect change personally and with the team and with the organization. It seems like common sense, but I know that it is an uncommon discipline. This is not about perfection. I've already shared abundance and generosity. I'll do that till the cows come home. Courage and vulnerability is definitely a little bit more peaks and valleys depending, but I'm reducing the volatility between the two as I practice, as I continue to be deliberate in how I show up, and starting from a perspective of who and what do you need from me, Morag, in this moment? And what are my guardrails? What am I willing to say yes to? And what am I willing to say no to in order to be that authentic best leader I can be? So we're about to go into our final breakout where you're going to have an opportunity, given that whirlwind introduction to the 5 practices, to talk about one of them and what that might look like in your workplace. But before we do, are there burning questions? What's going through your mind as you think about these 5 practices and the concepts of an ally mindset? Oh, yes. So how do you go? So my latest quote, I didn't put it up here because it feels egotistical when I put up quotes, Morag Barrett, but it's your misunderstood genius is at best somebody else's brilliant jerk, or at worst, just a jerk. And how do you close that gap between intent and impact? Because remember, none of us want to be seen as the jerk at work or the adversary. So 2 parts to your answer. Firstly, where would I start? 2 parts to the answer. Firstly is understanding the size of the gap. So whether you've had performance review that was different to your own intent or a 360 feedback, then being curious about what is it that I'm doing that causes others to misinterpret me in this workplace. I'm going to give you the opportunity to complete your own ally mindset profile. So that would give you an understanding around the 5 practices about where you may need to turn the dial up or turn the dial down. And then it's to go to your best friend at work and ask them, not for the how do I become an ally, but ask them for the one thing. Because often as leaders, we go for the laundry list and then we do none of it. And then that bites us in the butt because then people don't think we actually mean it and want to change. Choose one thing, make it a habit. The other stuff you can deal with later. Here are 2 great resources for you. Here are 4 great resources for you. Firstly, Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, what got you here won't get you there. Behaviors that can hold us back as we move through leadership levels. Now, the second is How Women Rise by Sally Helgerson. Has anybody read that one? So she actually worked with Dr. Marshall Goldsmith because when she read What Got You Here Won't Get You There, she was thinking, nah, as a woman, no, some of them maybe. So How Women Rise are the 11 behaviors that are more often attributed to women in leadership roles and what holds us back. And then the other two, both are by Michael Bungay Stanier. The Coaching Habit and The Advice Trap. So there you go, 4 books. And the reason I like The Coaching Habit, it goes back to Crystal's comment around mentoring and how we can coach our peers and simple questions, powerful questions that help us to help ourselves and others move forward. But what I love about The Advice Trap, especially as an habitual interrupter, it is all about channeling curiosity just a moment longer. So the old me, when you came to me and said, I have a problem with, I've already got 100 suggestions and you haven't even finished the sentence and I don't know what the with is, but hey, I've got 100 suggestions for you. As I apply the advice trap, I know to wait, to listen deeply, as we heard earlier, to the end of the sentence so I can give you maybe the top 1 or 3 suggestions versus 100 somewhat connected suggestions. So what got you here won't get you there. How Women Rise, take your pick. The Advice Trap and The Coaching Habit. And of course, the Ally Mindset Profile when you get to that bit. So here's what we're going to do. I just want you to pick one at your table. And if you are sitting solo, then here's an opportunity just to go and meet somebody else in the room. Just pick one of these practices. And then talk about, in your experience, how do you define it? Because it doesn't really matter how I define it. If you can't define it, how do you know if you're living up to it? How do you know if you need to do more of this or less of it? So talk about what do you know, how do you know when it's missing? Because invariably at the end of the day, when the day doesn't go well, we know that feeling. How do you know who are the role models for that particular practice? And what's one thing you know right now today? Whether it's to count to 3 before you answer, to listen deeply and try not to interrupt, in my case, what's one thing you could do to nurture the practice that you've chosen in your group? So I'm going to give you, let's see, about 10 minutes to do that in your group. We'll take some ahas and then I will wrap up this part of the presentation with the information on how you can take your own Ally Mindset Profile and next steps for you. So 10 minutes. So it's interesting, I went and listened to a few of the tables about the conversations, and courage and vulnerability was a theme I heard at several, action and accountability at others. And these are not linear. I mean, they're all connected for sure. But as I already shared with my own experience, I'm writing the book about it. I've half written the first book about it. This isn't about perfection. It's understanding the hand of cards I've been dealt. And again, what comes naturally and where do I need to be more deliberate and thoughtful? So courage and vulnerability is already shared. Vulnerability was a tough one for me. Somebody asked, well, what can I do to help a leader to be more vulnerable? And to be clear, being more vulnerable doesn't mean that I am, a mess on the floor and going, I don't know what to do. The organization's in trouble, blah, blah. It's starting small. And I gave an example. A colleague, a sister of a friend of mine, 10 years I'd known her. I'd lived here in the US, 10 years I'd known her. And she said, after 10 years, I had no idea you had 3 sons. That's how work life, Morag's home life, I kept them separate. There is nothing vulnerable necessarily or scary about revealing that I have 3 now 6-foot-tall boys. But in my mind, they were 2 separate worlds. So what can you do to start showing vulnerability is start small. And this is me miming Get them to write just 3 things like, have they got kids? I'm a dog person or a cat person. I prefer mountains or beach, whatever. The right appropriate conversation, keeping it in your jacket pocket. At Sky Team, we start every meeting, and we have done now for probably 5 years, with what we call Ripples and Joys, which I shamelessly stole from City Year. Anybody familiar with City Year as an organization? Well, Ripples and Joys, I thought it was so hokey when we first started doing it, but every week we start, a ripple is something that we've done, how we've helped a client or somebody move forward. Charlene will be my ripple for this week. I've already shared that story with you today. And then a joy is something personally or professional that has helped us to laugh and feel joy. And it is amazing that with my colleagues, who even when we started doing this 5 years ago, I've known them for 8 or 10 years, the things that we have learned and shared about each other has brought us even closer together. So courage and vulnerability starts in the small steps. What are you willing to share? When are you asking for help? Hey, I'm a habitual interrupter. What's one suggestion you have for me to stop interrupting quite so frequently? Thank you. Move on. That's courage and vulnerability in action. And then action and accountability. There was a conversation here about, well, I can't control you all. And that's why this book, The Ally Mindset and Better Work Together, is all about what can I do? Am I showing up, creating the legacy and reputation that I can be proud of when I leave this team or leave this room? Does the legacy and the way I'm showing up serve my purpose that's on the whiteboard? And that's what this is about. Am I being aware enough to know that I have the tendency to interrupt, that I am getting excited about this topic and channeling my inner Mark and just taking a pause, count to 3 before I respond? Because if I can show up as an ally, the go-to colleague, because the question was, well, how do I do that when I'm not in an environment where it's safe? Well, I'm creating my own little oasis of safety around me. I become the go-to colleague that increases like a pebble in a pond. We're making ripples because I'm role modeling what it means to show up, to be with and for others, but not as a doormat. Because abundance and generosity is grounded in our values. And what does this mean for me? Because that gives me the guardrails. It allows me to say no, but it also allows me to make a conscious choice as to when I'm going to flex those guardrails. Because another downside of abundance and generosity to the extreme, which is what I have, is I will say yes to, can you pick my brain? Can you do this, that, and the other? And of course, then I find myself running fast on my own hamster wheel, and it's hard to keep up. So abundance and generosity is set your guardrails, because now you can stand in your truth and own the action and accountability that enables you to be that best friend at work for others and the best friend at work for yourself. And that is a powerful position to be. So as we come to the end of our time together, I realize that 90 minutes is a whirlwind introduction. My gift to you, first off, is the opportunity to take your own ally mindset profile. If you go to the URL, Sky Team, and that's SKYE for the Isle of Skye on the west coast of Scotland, skyteam.cloud/AMP, ally mindset profile. You will find your way there. You complete the questionnaire, you'll get your report straight off. And I thank you for adding to our data set. As I said earlier on, 67% of people who have completed it to date, and we've had more than 500, have said that their success has been undermined by the words or actions of a colleague. And of that, when I look at the data, 19% of the undermining is coming from people above, but 28% comes from our peer relationships. 28% for others across the company, 11% from within my own function. So we are managing up and down, but we forget to look at the horizontal ripple effect that we're having with our colleagues. And this is reinforced by McKinsey, who in March of this year sent out some research that of the 2,000 respondents, 56% said that interacting with their boss or would describe their boss as mildly or highly toxic. Ugh. And of that, 76% said that interacting with their boss was the most stressful part of their workday. Having an ally mindset, being an ally, having a best friend at work, being a best friend at work, this matters. And so as we come to the end, I'm going to challenge you. How will you show up to be a better ally? Use the profile information to understand which of the 5 practices may you need to give extra care and attention to. But if nothing else, I want you to send a power thank you. The best boss, the best team that you thought about at the beginning of this session, I want you to send them a message, whether it's LinkedIn, text, homing pigeon, message to the universe. But let them know that you were thinking of them and why, because that is the deposit into the relationship bank account that will strengthen that tie for the future. And then the last piece for you. How can you be a better ally? It's all about look up, show up, and step up. Look up and give thought to how do you feel in your own presence? How do others feel in your presence? And does that align with the legacy you want to create in your purpose? And if not, then how do you need to be intentional about how you show up? Where do you need to be more candid or less candid, more vulnerable, less vulnerable? And ultimately step up in terms of, did you do your best? And tomorrow is a whole new day, a day for you to make the micro adjustments that ensure that you are the Batman to the Robin in your team, that you know who your Batman and your Alfreds are when you are walking into that next tough conversation or uncertain HR decision. Who is your posse and who has your back? My name is Morag Barrett. I'm the CEO of SkyTeam. I am passionate about the human experience and people first. There is no business, there is no product or service that cannot be undermined by a lack of care or attention in who we are and how we relate. That is the power of an ally mindset. So I challenge each of you to go first. Don't wait for the mysterious them to get better. Just think about what you can control and how can you look up, show up, and step up to being the best friend that others need at work. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, that's not a bad way to kick off the day, is it? How about one more time for Morag Barrett? So before we go to break, a couple of things. One of the things I neglected to tell you this morning is that for sure we will keep you well fed. So when you go out here for the break, there are house-made scones and donuts and sticky buns and coffee and hot apple cider and all of those things. We also want to remind you about the whiteboard by our registration desk to put down your purpose. And for those of you who were with us early this morning when we introduced who we were at UKG, I was reminded that today is Tuesday and not Monday. But I figured out it was Monday somewhere. I just must have been there and not here. So it's the only thing I can figure out. But we thank you for our kickoff of this Tuesday morning. We're going to take a 15-minute break. We'll chime you back in for our next speaker, Colin McCletchie, who's sitting right there. We will continue all of these great things that we're doing today. Go enjoy your cider and your donuts, and we'll see you back here in 15 minutes. And don't forget the whiteboard and to see Una Dillon if you want a look at the UKG functionality that we have.